In 1993, 10-year-old Vivian Brennan disappeared from her family's isolated farmhouse in Millbrook County, Indiana, while her twin sister slept just feet away in the same bedroom. Despite extensive searches, no trace of Vivian was ever found. No footprints in the frost-covered fields, no signs of forced entry, nothing. For 32 years, her family lived with unanswered questions and unbearable silence. But in January 2026, when demolition crews began tearing down the abandoned Brennan farmhouse, they discovered something hidden beneath the floorboards of the twins' bedroom, a discovery that would unravel 3 decades of lies and reveal that the most dangerous secrets are the ones buried closest to home. If you enjoy deep-dive true crime mysteries, subscribe to True Stories Vault for more haunting tales that will keep you up at night. The farmhouse stood like a skeletal monument against the winter sky, its white paint long since peeled away, exposing gray, weathered wood beneath. Natalie Brennan sat in her rental car at the end of the gravel driveway, hands gripping the steering wheel, though the engine had been off for 10 minutes. She hadn't been back to this place in over 20 years, had sworn she never would return. Yet here she was, drawn by a phone call that had shattered the fragile peace she'd built around her fractured life. The call had come 3 days ago from Sheriff Thomas Grayson, the same man who had led the original investigation into Vivian's disappearance back in 1993. His voice had been different on the phone, careful, weighted with something Natalie couldn't quite identify. "Miss Brennan, we need you to come back to Millbrook County. The demolition crew found something in the farmhouse. Something you need to see." She had pressed him for details, but he'd been maddeningly vague. "Not something I can discuss over the phone. But Natalie, after all these years, we might finally have answers about your sister." Now, staring at the house where her childhood had ended on a frigid November night in 1993, Natalie felt the familiar hollow ache where Vivian used to be. People who weren't twins couldn't understand it. The sensation of living with half of yourself missing, the phantom presence that never quite faded. For 32 years, Natalie had carried her sister's absence like a second shadow. She finally opened the car door and stepped out into the January cold. The fields surrounding the farmhouse stretched endlessly in all directions, barren and brown under the overcast sky. This isolation had once felt like freedom when she and Vivian were children, racing through cornfields in summer, building snow forts in winter. Now it felt sinister, oppressive, the perfect place for secrets to be buried and forgotten. Sheriff Grayson's patrol car was parked near the house, along with 2 construction vehicles and what appeared to be a crime scene investigation van. Yellow tape cordoned off the front porch, and Natalie could see figures moving inside through the broken windows. "Natalie." Sheriff Grayson emerged from the house, older now, his hair completely gray, but his eyes still sharp and assessing. He'd been in his 40s when Vivian disappeared, young enough to take the case personally, to promise Natalie's parents that he would find their daughter. That promise had remained unfulfilled for more than 3 decades. "Sheriff," Natalie replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "What did they find?" He didn't answer immediately, just studied her face with an expression that might have been pity. "Maybe you should sit down first." "I've been sitting for the past 4-hour drive. Just tell me." Sheriff Grayson sighed, his breath forming small clouds in the cold air. "The demolition crew was taking up the floorboards in the upstairs bedrooms. Your old room, where you and Vivian slept." He paused, and Natalie felt her heart begin to race. "They found a space beneath the floor, a crawl space that wasn't on any of the original building plans, and inside that space we found personal items, clothing, shoes, a backpack, all belonging to a child." Natalie's vision blurred at the edges. "Vivian's things? We'll need you to identify them. But Natalie, there's something else. Something that changes everything we thought we knew about the night your sister disappeared." Natalie followed Sheriff Grayson up the sagging porch steps, each creak of the wood a memory resurfacing. The front door hung askew on its hinges, and the interior of the farmhouse was even more derelict than she'd imagined. Wallpaper peeled in long strips, revealing water-stained plaster beneath. The hardwood floors were warped and buckled, and the air smelled of mold and decay. "Watch your step," Grayson warned as they made their way to the staircase. "Structure's not sound." Two crime scene technicians were working in what had been the living room, photographing and cataloging items. They looked up as Natalie passed, their expressions carefully neutral, but she could feel their curiosity. She was the surviving twin, the one who had supposedly slept through her sister's abduction, the child whose testimony had been the cornerstone of the original investigation. The stairs groaned under their weight as they climbed to the second floor. Natalie's childhood bedroom was at the end of the hallway, the door standing open. As they approached, she could see bright work lights set up inside, illuminating what had once been her sanctuary. The room was smaller than she remembered, the wallpaper, pale yellow with tiny flowers, now faded and torn. The twin beds where she and Vivian had slept were long gone, removed years ago when her parents finally accepted they would never return to this house. But Natalie could still see exactly where they had been positioned, could still picture Vivian's bed by the window, her own against the opposite wall. A section of the floor had been removed, exposing the framework beneath. One of the technicians, a woman in her 30s with auburn hair pulled back in a ponytail, was kneeling beside the opening, carefully photographing something Natalie couldn't yet see. "Dr. Brennan," Sheriff Grayson said, and Natalie realized he was using her professional title, perhaps as a way to remind her of the person she'd become, the life she'd built away from this place. "This is Rachel Torres, our lead crime scene investigator. Rachel, this is Natalie Brennan." Rachel stood, pulling off her latex gloves. "Dr. Brennan, I'm sorry to meet under these circumstances. I know this must be difficult." Natalie nodded, unable to speak, her eyes fixed on the hole in the floor. "The crawl space is approximately 3 feet deep and runs the length of this room," Rachel explained, her voice professionally gentle. "It was completely sealed, invisible from below or above unless you knew exactly where to look. The only access was through a section of floorboard that had been carefully cut and replaced to blend seamlessly with the surrounding floor." "Someone built a hiding place," Natalie said quietly. "Under our bedroom." "It appears that way, yes." Rachel reached down and carefully lifted a clear evidence bag from beside the opening. Inside was a small purple backpack, faded but still recognizable. Natalie's breath caught in her throat. She knew that backpack. Vivian had gotten it for her 9th birthday, had carried it everywhere in the months before she disappeared. "Is this your sister's?" Rachel asked, though the answer must have been clear from Natalie's reaction. "Yes, she had it the night she vanished. We assumed whoever took her had taken it too." Rachel set the bag down and picked up another. This one contained a small nightgown, pink with white stars. Natalie had owned an identical one. Their grandmother had given them matching nightgowns the Christmas before Vivian disappeared. "She was wearing that," Natalie whispered. "When I went to sleep that night, Vivian was wearing that nightgown." Sheriff Grayson exchanged a look with Rachel. "Natalie, we found something else in the crawl space. Something that suggests Vivian might not have been taken by a stranger." Natalie turned to face him fully. "What do you mean?" He pulled out his phone and showed her a photograph. It took Natalie a moment to understand what she was seeing. A small notebook, the kind a child might use for school, its cover decorated with stickers. The image showed a page of the notebook, and written in a child's careful handwriting were the words, "He said, if I told anyone, he would hurt Natalie. He said, this is our secret game, and I have to hide in the special place when he says so, or Natalie will get hurt instead." The room seemed to tilt around Natalie. She reached out to steady herself against the wall, her mind racing. "What are you saying? That Vivian knew her abductor? That she went with them willingly?" "We're not jumping to conclusions," Sheriff Grayson said carefully. "But these entries in the notebook suggest that your sister had been in that crawl space before the night she disappeared, multiple times over a period of several weeks, based on the dates she recorded." Natalie's thoughts spun back to that fall of 1993, trying to remember if Vivian had seemed different, scared, withdrawn. But the memories were clouded by time and trauma, and all she could clearly recall was the overwhelming normalcy of those final weeks. School, homework, playing in the fields after supper, the comfortable routine of their shared bedroom at night. "Someone was coming into our room," Natalie said slowly, the realization settling over her like ice water. "While we slept. Someone Vivian knew and trusted enough not to scream." "That's one possibility," Rachel said. "But there are others. The person might have threatened her, manipulated her. Children can be coerced into silence very effectively, especially when someone they trust tells them that speaking up will result in harm to a loved one." "I need to read that notebook," Natalie said. "All of it." Sheriff Grayson hesitated. "It's evidence in an active investigation now, but given the circumstances, I think we can arrange for you to review it at the station." "Natalie, there's more. The notebook mentions specific people. We're going to need you to help us identify them." "Who does she mention?" "Family members, people who had access to this house, to your bedroom." He paused. "Your father's name appears several times." The accusation hung in the air between them. Natalie felt her throat constrict, a familiar defensiveness rising up. "My father loved Vivian. He would never have hurt her." "I'm not saying he did, but we have to follow the evidence wherever it leads." Natalie forced herself to breathe, to think like the psychologist she'd trained to become, not the traumatized child she'd once been. "My father died 6 years ago. Cancer. My mother's in a memory care facility in Indianapolis. Early onset Alzheimer's. She doesn't even remember she had 2 daughters anymore." "I know. I'm sorry. But there were other people around back then. Your uncle lived here for a while, didn't he? Gerald Brennan?" The name sent a chill through Natalie. Uncle Gerald. Her father's younger brother, who had stayed at the farmhouse off and on during his frequent periods of unemployment. He'd been there the night Vivian disappeared, had been one of the first people questioned by police. "Where is Gerald now?" Natalie asked. "Still in Millbrook County. Lives about 15 miles from here, in a trailer park outside of town. We'll be bringing him in for questioning." Sheriff Grayson studied her carefully. "Is there anything you remember about him that seemed off? Anything that made you uncomfortable as a child?" Natalie searched her memories, but Gerald had been mostly a peripheral presence in her childhood, a quiet man who worked odd jobs and spent his evenings watching television in the spare room. She and Vivian had been a little afraid of him, she remembered now, but that had seemed natural. He rarely smiled, rarely spoke to them directly. "He was strange," Natalie admitted, "kept to himself, but I never saw him do anything inappropriate." "Did he ever come into your bedroom?" The question made Natalie's skin crawl. "Not that I remember, but I was 10 years old. There's so much I don't remember clearly." Rachel spoke up. "Dr. Brennan, would you be willing to undergo hypnotherapy? Sometimes childhood memories can be recovered through—" "I know what hypnotherapy is," Natalie interrupted, more sharply than she intended. "I'm a clinical psychologist, and no, I'm not interested in manufacturing memories based on suggestion." "It's just an option," Rachel said mildly. Sheriff Grayson checked his watch. "It's getting late, and we have a lot of work to do here. Why don't we continue this conversation at the station tomorrow morning? You can review Vivian's notebook, and we'll go over everything we know so far." Natalie nodded, grateful for the reprieve. She took one last look at the hole in the floor, at the space where her sister had hidden in terror, and felt a wave of guilt so powerful it nearly brought her to her knees. "I was right there," she whispered, "sleeping 6 feet away from her. How did I not know?" Sheriff Grayson's expression softened. "You were a child, Natalie. Whatever happened here, it wasn't your fault." But as Natalie descended the stairs and walked out into the fading daylight, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had failed Vivian in some fundamental way. For 32 years, she had believed her sister had been stolen in the night by a stranger, a random act of violence that could have happened to anyone. Now she was faced with a far more terrible possibility, that the person who had taken Vivian had been someone close, someone who had walked the halls of their home, who had known exactly when and how to strike, and that Natalie had been sleeping mere feet away while her twin sister had been suffering in silence, too terrified to cry out for help. The Millbrook Motor Lodge hadn't changed much since Natalie's childhood, still the same faded brick exterior and flickering neon sign advertising color TV and AR conditioning as if these were luxuries rather than basic necessities. She checked into a room on the second floor, dropped her overnight bag on the sagging bed, and stood at the window, looking out over the small town where she'd spent the first 10 years of her life. Millbrook had always been small, population hovering around 3,000, a main street with a handful of businesses, a courthouse, 2 churches, and miles of farmland stretching in every direction. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, where secrets should have been impossible to keep. Yet someone had kept the most terrible secret of all for 3 decades. Natalie's phone buzzed, a text from her partner, Marcus, back in Chicago. "How are you holding up? Call me when you can." She appreciated his concern, but didn't have the emotional energy to explain everything over the phone. She texted back, "Long day. We'll call tomorrow. Love you." Setting her phone aside, Natalie pulled out her laptop and opened the file she'd brought with her, a digital copy of the original police investigation into Vivian's disappearance. Sheriff Grayson had given it to her years ago when she'd asked for it as part of her own attempt to make sense of what had happened. She'd studied it obsessively in graduate school, analyzing it with the tools of her training, looking for patterns and inconsistencies. The case file opened with the initial missing person report, filed by her mother, Vivian Brennan, at 6:47 a.m. on November 19, 1993. Natalie read through the familiar details. Catherine had gone to wake the twins for school and found only Natalie in the bedroom, sleeping peacefully. Vivian's bed was empty, the covers pulled back as if she had gotten up normally. A search of the house revealed no sign of Vivian. The back door was found unlocked but not damaged. No footprints in the frost outside, no signs of struggle. The investigating officers had initially suspected a runaway situation, but that theory had quickly been dismissed. Vivian's coat and shoes were still in her closet, and the temperature that night had dropped to 28 degrees. No child would venture outside in a nightgown in that cold, unless forced. Natalie scrolled to her own statement, given the afternoon of the disappearance. Reading it now, she could hear her 10-year-old voice in the stilted, formal language. "I went to sleep at 9 p.m. after Mom said goodnight. Vivian was in her bed reading a book. I didn't hear anything during the night. When I woke up, Vivian was gone." The police had questioned her gently but thoroughly. Had she heard footsteps, voices, the sound of a door opening or closing? Had Vivian seemed scared or upset before bed? Had anyone been acting strangely around them recently? To all of these questions, 10-year-old Natalie had answered no. She had slept soundly that night, exhausted from a school field trip to a pumpkin patch. She remembered nothing, heard nothing, knew nothing. But now, armed with the knowledge of the crawl space and Vivian's notebook, Natalie wondered if she had missed something crucial. Had there been sounds she'd dismissed as normal house noises? Had Vivian tried to wake her and failed? Or had Vivian deliberately stayed quiet, trying to protect her twin sister from whatever horror she was facing? Natalie continued through the file, reviewing the list of people who had been interviewed in the days following Vivian's disappearance. Her parents, naturally. Uncle Gerald, who had been staying in the guest room. Mrs. Henderson from the neighboring farm 2 miles away. Their school teachers, the bus driver, the mailman. Everyone had alibis or explanations. Gerald claimed he'd been asleep in the guest room all night and hadn't heard anything. The doors and windows had been checked. Only the back door was unlocked, and Gerald said he'd gone out to smoke around midnight, might have forgotten to lock it when he came back in. That unlocked door had been the focus of the investigation for years. The prevailing theory was that an intruder had entered through it, had known the layout of the house, had crept upstairs and taken Vivian without waking anyone. But who? And why? Natalie opened a new document and began typing, trying to organize her thoughts. Known facts. Crawl space hidden under bedroom floor, not on building plans. Vivian's belongings found inside. Backpack, nightgown, notebook. Notebook indicates Vivian had been hiding there multiple times before disappearance. Vivian was threatened. Told that Natalie would be hurt if she told anyone. Someone had repeated access to our bedroom questions. Who built the crawl space and when? How long had the abuse been going on? Why didn't Vivian tell anyone despite the threats? What happened the final night that was different from the other times? Where is Vivian now? That last question was the one that haunted Natalie most. The discovery of Vivian's belongings in the crawl space suggested she'd been hidden there that night. But where had she gone from there? Had the abductor taken her from the house later? Or had something even worse happened? Natalie closed her laptop and lay back on the bed, staring at the water-stained ceiling. Tomorrow she would read Vivian's notebook, would confront whatever truths her sister had tried to document in the weeks before she vanished. But tonight, she allowed herself to drift back to a simpler memory. She was 8 years old, and she and Vivian were lying in their beds after lights out, whispering to each other in the darkness. They had invented a game called twin telepathy, where they would try to send thoughts to each other across the space between their beds. Vivian would think of a color or a number, and Natalie would try to guess it, and sometimes, often enough to feel magical, she would guess correctly. "Do you think we'll always be together?" Vivian had asked one night. "Always," Natalie had promised with the absolute certainty of childhood. "We're twins. That means we're connected forever." But they hadn't been together forever. One November night, something had severed that connection, and Natalie had spent the last 32 years living with the amputation of half her soul. She must have fallen asleep because she woke with a start to find the room dark and her phone buzzing with an incoming call. The screen showed Sheriff Grayson's name. Natalie's heart raced as she answered. "Sheriff, what's wrong?" "We brought Gerald Brennan in for questioning an hour ago," Grayson said without preamble. He lawyered up immediately, which is his right, but Natalie, before his lawyer arrived, he said something you need to know. "What did he say?" There was a pause, and Natalie could hear voices in the background, the sounds of the police station. "He said, 'You're wasting your time. The person who knows what happened to Vivian is Natalie. She was there. She knows more than she's telling.'" Natalie felt as if she'd been punched in the stomach. "That's insane. I was 10 years old. I was asleep." "I know, but he seemed very certain. He kept repeating it until his lawyer shut him down." Grayson sighed. "I'm not suggesting he's telling the truth. He might be trying to deflect attention from himself. But Natalie, is there any possibility, any at all, that you remember more than you told us back then?" "No," Natalie said. But even as she spoke, she felt a tremor of doubt. Human memory was unreliable, especially childhood memory, especially memory of trauma. It was possible she had witnessed something and suppressed it, her young mind protecting itself from unbearable knowledge. "Okay, get some rest. We'll talk more tomorrow." After he hung up, Natalie sat in the darkness of her motel room, trying to push past the barriers of time and trauma to access that night in November 1993. She closed her eyes and tried to picture their bedroom, tried to imagine the sound of footsteps on the old floor, a whispered voice, movement in the shadows. But there was nothing, just darkness, and the terrible feeling that everyone was right. She should remember, she should know, and her inability to recall was a failure that had cost her sister everything. The Millbrook County Sheriff's Department occupied a brick building on the corner of Main Street and Hickory Avenue, its American flag snapping in the cold January wind. Natalie arrived at 8:30 the next morning, her sleep having been fitful and haunted by fragments of dreams she couldn't quite remember upon waking. Sheriff Grayson met her in the lobby, a steaming cup of coffee in his hand. "Natalie, Thanks for coming in early. I've got Vivian's notebook set up in the conference room. Take as much time as you need." He led her down a hallway, lined with photos of past sheriffs and community service awards, stopping at a door marked Conference Room B. Inside, a long table dominated the space, and on it sat a single clear evidence bag containing the small notebook Natalie had seen in the photograph yesterday. "We've already processed it for fingerprints," Grayson explained. "Mostly too degraded to get anything useful after 32 years. You can handle it with gloves on." He gestured to a box of latex gloves on the table. "Rachel will be in the observation room if you need anything. I'll be in my office." After he left, Natalie stood alone in the conference room, staring at the notebook through its plastic barrier. The cover was decorated with stickers, rainbows, unicorns, smiley faces, the innocent decorations of a 10-year-old girl who still believed the world was fundamentally good. Natalie pulled on the latex gloves with trembling hands and carefully removed the notebook from the evidence bag. The pages were slightly yellowed, but otherwise well preserved, protected by their decades in the sealed crawl space. Natalie opened to the first entry, dated September 23, 1993, just 8 weeks before Vivian disappeared. The handwriting was unmistakably Vivian's, careful, rounded letters, some words misspelled in the way of a 4th grader still mastering written language. Natalie began to read. September 23, 1993. "He came into our room again last night. He said, 'I have to play the quiet game, and if I'm really quiet, I get to sleep in the special place where I'm safe.' He says Natalie doesn't know about the special place because she sleeps too hard. He says this is our secret, and I can never tell anyone, especially not Natalie, because then bad men would come and hurt her. I don't want Natalie to get hurt." I asked him why the bad men want to hurt us, and he said because we're special girls and bad men like to hurt special girls. He said he's protecting us, but only if I play the quiet game right. Natalie's hands shook as she turned the page. The entry was matter-of-fact, written in the voice of a child trying to make sense of something beyond her comprehension. There was no name mentioned, just he, September 30th, 1993. "I had to go to the special place 3 times this week. It's very dark under the floor, and I can hear Natalie sleeping above me. Sometimes I want to knock on the floor so she'll wake up, but I'm too scared. He said if I make noise, the bad men will hear, and they'll come for Natalie. Last night, he brought me crackers and juice because I was in the special place for a long time. He said I'm being so brave and good. He touches my hair and says I'm his favorite girl. I don't like when he touches my hair, but I stay quiet." Natalie felt bile rise in her throat. She forced herself to continue reading, page after page of Vivian's careful documentation of her abuse. The entries grew progressively more disturbing. The person, still unnamed, had been grooming Vivian, manipulating her with threats against Natalie, convincing her that hiding in the crawlspace was protection rather than abuse. October 15th, 1993. "Uncle Gerald saw him taking me to the special place last night. I thought Uncle Gerald would tell Mom and Dad, but he didn't. He just went back to his room. The next day, Uncle Gerald gave me a candy bar and said I should be a good girl and do what I'm told. I'm scared of Uncle Gerald now, too. What if he's one of the bad men? But he didn't hurt Natalie, so maybe he's okay." Natalie's breath caught. So Gerald had known something was happening. He'd witnessed it and done nothing, even encouraged Vivian's silence. She marked the page and continued reading, her horror mounting with each entry. October 28th, 1993. "He said soon I might have to go away for a little while to the special place that's even safer than under the floor. He said it's far away where the bad men can definitely never find me. I asked if Natalie could come too, and he got mad. He said Natalie doesn't need the special place because she's not in danger like I am. He said I'm the one the bad men want. I'm scared to go to the special place. I asked if Mom and Dad would know where I am, and he said they can't know because they might accidentally tell the bad men. Everything has to be secret to keep everyone safe. The progression was clear now. Vivian's abuser had been preparing her for an abduction, grooming her to go willingly, to believe she was protecting her family by disappearing. Natalie felt tears streaming down her face as she read the final entries. November 10th, 1993. I told him I don't want to play the quiet game anymore. I told him I think he's lying about the bad men. He got really scary. His face changed and his voice got mean. He said if I tell anyone or if I stop playing the game, he won't be able to protect Natalie anymore, and it will be all my fault when the bad men take her. He said they'll do terrible things to her and I'll have to live knowing I could have stopped it. Then he was nice again and said he was sorry for scaring me. He brought me cookies and said, "I'm such a good, brave girl. I'm so confused. I want to tell Mom, but I'm scared he's telling the truth about Natalie." November 15th, 1993. Only 3 more days until I go to the special place. He showed me a picture of it. It looks like a little house in the woods. He said I'll be safe there and I can come home when the bad men give up looking for me. He said it might be a long time, maybe even years, but I have to be patient. I'm scared. I don't want to leave Natalie. We've never been apart, even for one night. I tried to ask him if I could just tell Natalie goodbye, and he said absolutely not because Natalie would try to stop me, and then the bad men would get her for sure. I wrote her a letter, but I'm going to hide it in my special box under my bed. Maybe someday she'll find it. Natalie's heart was racing. A letter. Vivian had written her a letter. She immediately stood and called for Sheriff Grayson, who appeared in the doorway within moments. "What is it?" "Vivian wrote me a letter. She says she hid it in a box under her bed." "Did you find anything like that in the house?" Grayson's expression shifted. "We found a small metal box in the crawlspace with the other items. We haven't opened it yet. Rachel wanted to process it carefully for any biological evidence. Come on." He led Natalie to the evidence room, where Rachel Torres was cataloging items on a metal shelf. "Rachel, the metal box from the crawlspace. We need to open it now." Rachel retrieved the box, a small tin decorated with flowers, the kind a child might use to store treasures. She carefully set it on the examination table and photographed it from multiple angles before opening the latch. Inside were several folded pieces of notebook paper, a dried flower, and a photograph of Natalie and Vivian at their 9th birthday party. Rachel carefully unfolded the top letter with gloved hands, revealing Vivian's handwriting. She read aloud, "Dear Natalie, if you're reading this, it means I had to go to the special place, and I didn't get to say goodbye. I'm so sorry. I wanted to tell you everything, but he said I couldn't because then the bad men would hurt you. I'm going away to keep you safe. Please don't be sad. He promised I can come home when it's safe. I need you to know that I love you more than anything. You're my best friend and my twin, and I miss you already, even though I haven't left yet. When I come back, we can play twin telepathy again, and everything will be normal. Please take care of Mom and Dad. Don't let them be too sad. If something goes wrong and I don't come back, I need you to know it wasn't your fault. You didn't do anything wrong. He made me promise not to tell you. He is." The letter ended there, mid-sentence, as if Vivian had been interrupted or had lost her nerve. Natalie stared at those 2 words. He is. Willing the sentence to complete itself, willing her sister to reach across 3 decades and name her abuser. "She was going to tell me who it was," Natalie whispered. "She was going to write his name, and something stopped her." Sheriff Grayson's phone rang. He glanced at the screen, and his expression hardened. "I need to take this." He stepped out of the room, and Natalie could hear his muffled voice through the door, growing agitated. When he returned, his face was grim. "That was one of my deputies. Gerald Brennan is dead. His neighbor found him an hour ago, hanging in his trailer. It's being ruled a suicide." Natalie felt the room spin. "He killed himself? Why now, after all these years?" "Because we were closing in on him," Rachel said quietly. because he knew what we'd found in that crawl space, and he knew it was only a matter of time before we connected him to Vivian's disappearance. But Natalie shook her head, staring down at Vivian's unfinished letter. No, Gerald was involved, but he wasn't the primary abuser. Vivian distinguished between him and Uncle Gerald in her notebook. There were two of them, and one is still out there. Sheriff Grayson met her eyes, understanding dawning. Your father. No, Natalie said automatically, but even as she denied it, she felt doubt creeping in. Her father, Thomas Brennan, had been a respected member of the community, a deacon at their church, a man everyone trusted. But abusers often hid behind respectability. And who else would have had such unrestricted access to their bedroom, such complete trust from a 10-year-old girl? We need to exhume his body, Rachel said. If he had physical contact with Vivian the way the notebook suggests, there might be DNA evidence on her belongings, even after all this time. Natalie wanted to argue, wanted to defend the father she'd loved and mourned, but the evidence was mounting. The timeline fit, the access fit, and Gerald's suicide suggested he'd been protecting someone whose secret had died with him. Do what you need to do, Natalie said, her voice hollow. I want the truth, whatever it is. Natalie spent the rest of the morning at the police station, going through evidence with a clinical detachment that surprised even her. Perhaps this was her training kicking in, the years of professional distance she'd cultivated as a psychologist, allowing her to observe trauma without being consumed by it. Or perhaps she was simply numb, her mind unable to fully process the possibility that her father had been a monster. Rachel had spread out photographs of the items found in the crawl space across the conference room table. In addition to Vivian's backpack and nightgown, there were several other objects. A child's hairbrush with strands of blonde hair still tangled in the bristles, a pair of small socks, a worn stuffed rabbit that Natalie remembered Vivian sleeping with every night. We're running DNA analysis on everything, Rachel explained. Hair, fabric fibers, anything that might give us genetic material from whoever handled these items. With modern technology, we can detect touch DNA even from objects that old, especially since they were sealed away from contamination. How long will the analysis take? Natalie asked. Rush job. We're looking at maybe a week for preliminary results. Full analysis could take longer. Sheriff Grayson entered the room with a file folder. I've been going through your father's financial records from 1993. There are some irregularities that might be significant. He opened the folder and showed Natalie a series of bank statements. Thomas Brennan had a separate savings account that your mother apparently didn't know about. In the 6 months before Vivian disappeared, he made regular cash withdrawals. $500 here, $800 there, always in amounts small enough not to draw attention. Total comes to about $15,000. What was he doing with the money? Natalie asked. That's what we're trying to figure out. No major purchases that we can find. No evidence of gambling debts or affairs. The money just vanished. Natalie thought about this. Vivian mentioned in her notebook that he showed her a picture of the special place, a little house in the woods. What if he was building something, or renting a property somewhere remote? Grayson nodded slowly. We're pulling property records now, looking for any land purchases or rentals in his name. But if he was smart, he might have used a false name or a shell company. A young deputy knocked on the door. Sheriff, the medical examiner is on line 2. Says it's urgent regarding the Gerald Brennan autopsy. Grayson picked up the conference room phone and put it on speaker. This is Sheriff Grayson. What have you got for me, Doc? The medical examiner's voice crackled through the speaker. Sheriff, I've completed the preliminary examination of Gerald Brennan. The cause of death is indeed asphyxiation consistent with hanging, but there are some concerning findings. Such as? Bruising on his wrists and ankles that appears to have occurred perimortem, at or near the time of death. The pattern is consistent with restraints. Additionally, there are defensive wounds on his hands and petechial hemorrhaging that suggests a struggle. Rachel leaned forward. You're saying he didn't hang himself? I'm saying the scene is inconsistent with a straightforward suicide. Someone may have restrained him, possibly forced the ligature around his neck. I'm ruling this as suspicious pending further investigation." After the medical examiner hung up, the three of them sat in stunned silence. Finally, Sheriff Grayson spoke. "Gerald knew something. Someone wanted to make sure he never talked." "The same someone who took Vivian," Natalie said. "My father died 6 years ago. If he was the primary abuser, who killed Gerald?" "Maybe your father had an accomplice," Rachel suggested. "Someone who helped him hide Vivian, who's still alive and still protecting the secret." Natalie's mind raced through the possibilities. Who had been close to her father? Who would have helped him commit such a horrific crime and kept silent for 3 decades? Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. She opened it and felt her blood run cold. The message contained a single photograph, a recent picture of Natalie herself, taken through the window of her motel room the previous night. Below the image were 3 words: "Stop digging. Leave." She showed the phone to Sheriff Grayson, whose face darkened. "Someone's watching you. Someone who knows you're here and what you're investigating." "We need to get you somewhere safe," Rachel said. "This person has already killed once, possibly more. You could be in danger." But Natalie shook her head. "I'm not leaving. For 32 years, I've lived with not knowing what happened to my sister. Now, we're finally close to the truth. I'm not running away." "Then we put you in protective custody," Grayson insisted. "Move you to a safe house, assign an officer to watch you." Before Natalie could respond, her phone rang. The caller ID showed a local number she didn't recognize. She answered on speaker. "Hello?" There was breathing on the other end, then a woman's voice, thin and wavering. "Is this Natalie Brennan?" "Yes. Who is this?" "My name is Patricia Henderson. I live at the farm next to your family's old place. Sheriff Grayson came to see me yesterday, asking questions about when your sister disappeared." Natalie remembered Mrs. Henderson vaguely, an elderly woman even back in 1993, who lived alone and kept to herself. "What can I do for you, Mrs. Henderson?" "I didn't tell the sheriff everything yesterday. I was scared. But I've been thinking about it all night, and I can't keep quiet anymore. There's something you need to know about the night your sister vanished." Natalie's heart began to race. "What is it?" "I saw someone that night. I couldn't sleep, so I was sitting by my window around 2 in the morning. I saw a car pull up to your farmhouse, a dark sedan, headlights off. A man got out and went inside. About 20 minutes later, he came out carrying something wrapped in a blanket. He put it in the trunk and drove away." "Did you tell the police this in 1993? Sheriff Grayson demanded. Mrs. Henderson's voice trembled. "I tried to. The next day I called the station and told them what I'd seen. But the officer who came to take my statement was a man I didn't know. Said he was new to the department. He wrote everything down, then told me the car I described belonged to one of the deputies who'd been on patrol that night. He said I must have been confused, seen the deputy checking on your house after the missing person report came in. But Sheriff, that wasn't true. I know what I saw, and it was before anyone knew Vivian was missing." Grayson exchanged a sharp look with Rachel. "Mrs. Henderson, can you describe this officer who took your statement?" "Tall, maybe 35 or 40 years old, dark hair. He had a scar on his left hand, right across the knuckles. I remember because he kept flexing his fingers while he talked to me like it hurt." "What name did he give you?" "Deputy Martin. But when I tried to follow up a few days later, the department said there was no Deputy Martin working there. My statement had disappeared from the files. I was scared, Miss Brennan. I thought maybe I was losing my mind. So I kept quiet all these years." Natalie felt pieces clicking into place. A man impersonating a police officer. Someone with inside knowledge of the investigation who could intercept witnesses and suppress evidence. "Not just someone," Rachel said grimly. "Someone who knew exactly what Mrs. Henderson had seen and needed to silence her before it became official record." Sheriff Grayson was already pulling up personnel files on his laptop. I need to see who was working in the department in 1993. Someone who would have had access to the case files, who could have posed as a deputy without raising suspicion. As he scrolled through the records, Natalie's phone buzzed again. Another text from the unknown number. I warned you. Now someone you love will pay the price. Below, it was a photograph that made Natalie's blood run cold. It showed Marcus, her partner, getting into his car in the parking garage of their Chicago apartment building. The image had been taken within the last few hours. She could see the date stamp in the corner. They're threatening Marcus, Natalie said, her voice shaking. They know where we live. They're watching him. Rachel immediately pulled out her phone. I'll contact Chicago PD. Get someone over to your apartment right away. But as she made the call, Sheriff Grayson let out a low oath. He turned his laptop screen toward Natalie and Rachel, showing a personnel file with a photograph. The man in the picture was in his late 30s, with dark hair and cold eyes. The name beneath read, Deputy James Keller, 1990-1996. He left the department in 1996, Grayson said, 2 years after Vivian disappeared. His personnel file says he relocated to Illinois for family reasons. Illinois, Natalie repeated slowly. Chicago is in Illinois. Rachel had gone pale. This isn't random. He followed you. He's been watching you for years, waiting to see if you'd remember something, if you'd come back here and start asking questions. Grayson was already on his phone, calling in backup, issuing orders. But Natalie's mind was reeling. For 3 decades, the man who had taken her sister had been living in the same city as her, possibly watching her from a distance, ensuring she never got too close to the truth. And now that she'd returned to Millbrook and the evidence was surfacing, he was eliminating anyone who could identify him. Gerald Brennan, who had witnessed the abuse and said nothing. Mrs. Henderson, who had seen him that night but been silenced before she could give official testimony. And now, Marcus, whose only crime was loving Natalie and supporting her search for answers. I'm calling him, Natalie said, pulling up Marcus's number. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. On the 4th ring, it went to voicemail. She tried again, same result. Chicago PD is en route to your apartment, Rachel said. ETA, 3 minutes. Those 3 minutes stretched into eternity. Natalie paced the conference room, trying Marcus's phone over and over, each unanswered call ratcheting her terror higher. She thought about all the times she'd felt watched in Chicago, dismissed it as paranoia left over from childhood trauma. But she hadn't been paranoid. James Keller had been there, in the shadows, waiting. Finally, Rachel's phone rang. She answered, listened, then met Natalie's eyes with an expression of relief. They found him. He's safe. Officers are bringing him to the station for protection. Natalie's legs went weak. She sank into a chair, overwhelmed with gratitude and residual fear. Marcus was safe, but the threat was real, and it was escalating. Sheriff Grayson was pulling up more information on James Keller. Current address on record is an apartment in Evanston, just outside Chicago. I'm coordinating with Illinois authorities to bring him in for questioning. What if he runs? Natalie asked. He won't run. He's been getting away with this for 32 years. Men like him, they start to believe they're untouchable. Grayson's expression was hard. But he made a mistake. He threatened you directly. That gives us grounds to bring him in, and once we have him, we'll break him. But Natalie wasn't so sure. James Keller had evaded justice for 3 decades, had manipulated evidence and witnesses, had possibly killed at least twice. He was intelligent, careful, and utterly ruthless. And somewhere, buried in her own memories, might be the key to finally stopping him. By late afternoon, the conference room at the Millbrook County Sheriff's Department had transformed into a command center. A whiteboard covered one wall, filled with names, dates, and connecting lines that formed a web of conspiracy spanning 3 decades. Rachel had printed photographs of everyone involved and arranged them chronologically. Thomas Brennan, Gerald Brennan, James Keller, and in the center, a school photo of Vivian at age 10, her smile bright and trusting. Natalie stood before the board, studying the connections. Keller was working patrol the night Vivian disappeared. He would have been one of the first responders when my mother called in the missing person report, which gave him access to the scene before anyone else, Rachel added. He could have contaminated evidence, redirected the investigation, planted false leads. Sheriff Grayson was on the phone with Illinois State Police, coordinating Keller's apprehension. He'd been at it for an hour, his frustration mounting with each call. Finally, he hung up with barely controlled anger. Keller's apartment in Evanston is empty. Neighbors say they haven't seen him in 2 days. Illinois PD found his car in long-term parking at O'Hare Airport, but there's no record of him boarding any flights. He knew we were closing in, Natalie said. He probably left Chicago as soon as I drove down here. He's been monitoring me somehow, my phone, my email, something. Rachel pulled up Natalie's recent call logs on her laptop. We should check your devices for spyware. If Keller has technical skills, he could have been tracking your communications for years. While Rachel began running diagnostic scans, Sheriff Grayson turned to Natalie with a grave expression. I need to ask you something, and I want you to really think before you answer. Is there any place around here that was significant to you and Vivian as children? Somewhere remote, somewhere your father might have known about? Natalie closed her eyes, reaching back through the decades. The farmhouse, obviously, the elementary school in town, the library where their mother had taken them every Saturday, the creek that ran through their property where they'd caught tadpoles in summer. And then another memory surfaced, one she hadn't thought about in years. The old Pritchard place, she said slowly. About 5 miles from our farm, deep in the woods. It was an abandoned hunting cabin that had belonged to some family that moved away in the 70s. My father used to take us there sometimes for picnics. He said he'd played there as a boy, knew the owners before they left. Grayson was already pulling up property records. The Pritchard family. Let me see what I can find. While he searched, Natalie let the memory expand. She could see the cabin now in her mind's eye. Small, just one room really, with a stone fireplace and windows covered with yellowed newspapers. There had been an old pump outside for water and wooden steps leading down to a root cellar where they'd found empty glass jars and forgotten preserves. The cellar, Natalie said suddenly. There was a root cellar underneath. My father said it was dangerous, told us never to go down there alone. Rachel looked up from her laptop. A root cellar would be the perfect place to hide someone. Dark, soundproof, temperature-controlled. Grayson spun his monitor around. Property records show the Pritchard cabin and surrounding 15 acres were sold in 1992, 1 year before Vivian disappeared. The buyer was a company called Millbrook Holdings, LLC. Who owns Millbrook Holdings? Natalie asked, though dread was already pooling in her stomach. Grayson clicked through several more screens. The LLC was dissolved in 2000, but the original incorporation papers list 2 partners, Thomas Brennan and James Keller. The room fell silent. Natalie felt the final pieces of the puzzle clicking into place with sickening clarity. Her father and Keller had been partners. They'd purchased the property together a year before Vivian disappeared, created the perfect hiding place, and then executed their plan with methodical precision. The special place, Natalie whispered. That's where he took her. That's where Vivian has been all along. Sheriff Grayson was already grabbing his radio, calling for backup units, alerting the tactical team. We're going to that cabin now. Rachel, get the crime scene unit ready to roll. Natalie. I'm coming with you, Natalie said, her voice leaving no room for argument. This could be dangerous. If Keller knows we're onto him, he might be there, waiting. My sister has been alone in the dark for 32 years because I slept through the night she needed me most. I'm not letting her be alone anymore. 20 minutes later, a convoy of police vehicles wound through the back roads of Millbrook County toward the old Pritchard property. Natalie rode with Sheriff Grayson, her hands clenched in her lap, her mind racing with possibilities both hopeful and horrifying. What if Vivian was still alive? What if she'd been kept in that cellar all these years, imprisoned, waiting for rescue that never came. The notebook had mentioned the special place where she would be safe for maybe even years. Had Keller and her father intended to keep Vivian indefinitely? Or had something gone wrong? The convoy turned onto a narrow dirt road, barely visible through the overgrown brush. Trees pressed in on both sides, their bare branches scraping against the vehicles like skeletal fingers. The road hadn't been maintained in decades, rutted and washed out in places, forcing them to slow to a crawl. Finally, they reached a small clearing. The cabin stood in the center, more dilapidated than Natalie remembered. The roof had partially collapsed and the windows were broken. Vines had overtaken the walls, giving the structure an organic, almost alive appearance. The tactical team deployed first, weapons drawn, moving in practiced formation toward the cabin. Natalie watched from behind the safety of a patrol car, her heart hammering against her ribs. Minutes ticked by with agonizing slowness as officers cleared the main structure. "Building is clear," the team leader's voice crackled over the radio. "No occupants, but there's definitely recent activity here. Fresh tire tracks around back, debris that's been moved." Sheriff Grayson gave Natalie a nod, and they approached the cabin together. Inside, the single room was empty except for an old metal bed frame and a table covered in what appeared to be surveillance equipment, monitors, recording devices, hard drives. "He's been using this place as a base of operations," Rachel said, carefully photographing the equipment. "We'll need to analyze all of this data." But Natalie's attention was drawn to the far corner of the room, where a rug covered a section of the floor. She moved toward it, and Grayson helped her pull the rug aside, revealing a wooden trapdoor with a heavy padlock. "The root cellar," Natalie said. One of the officers produced bolt cutters and made short work of the padlock. The trapdoor swung open with a groan of rusted hinges, revealing stone steps descending into darkness. The smell that wafted up was musty and damp, tinged with something else Natalie couldn't identify. Sheriff Grayson shone a powerful flashlight into the opening. "I'm going down. Everyone else stay here until I assess the situation." But Natalie was already moving toward the steps. "I told you, I'm not leaving her alone." They descended together, their flashlights cutting through the oppressive darkness. The cellar was larger than Natalie had expected, extending beyond the footprint of the cabin above. The stone walls were slick with moisture, and the air was cold enough to see their breath. As they reached the bottom of the steps, Natalie's flashlight beam swept across the space and caught something that made her gasp. Against the far wall was a small cot with a thin mattress and a blanket. Beside it stood a shelf stocked with canned goods and bottled water, and on the wall above the cot, someone had carved marks into the stone, hundreds of them, maybe thousands, organized into groups of 5. Days. Someone had been counting days down here. Sheriff Grayson moved toward the cot, his flashlight revealing more details. A bucket in the corner serving as a toilet, a stack of books, their covers warped from humidity, and on a small ledge carved into the stone wall, a photograph in a plastic frame showing 2 10-year-old girls smiling at the camera. Natalie and Vivian on their last birthday together. "She was here," Natalie whispered. Vivian was here. But the cot was empty, the blanket neatly folded. There was no sign of Vivian herself, no indication of where she might be now. Rachel called down from above. "Sheriff, we found something outside. You need to see this." They climbed back up to find Rachel standing near a cleared area behind the cabin. The ground had been recently disturbed, the earth darker and looser than the surrounding soil. Natalie's blood ran cold. "No," she said. "No, we're too late." "We don't know that," Grayson said, but his voice lacked conviction. He called for the forensics team to bring ground-penetrating radar and excavation tools. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the clearing, the team set up lights and began the careful process of excavating the disturbed earth. Natalie stood at a distance, Rachel beside her, both women silent as they watched the investigators work. An hour passed. Then 2. The hole grew deeper, and then one of the techs called out, "I've got something." Everyone froze. The tech carefully brushed away more soil, revealing fabric, a piece of cloth, blue and white, partially decomposed. Natalie recognized it immediately. The nightgown. The one Vivian had been wearing the night she disappeared. The one that should have been in the evidence bag at the police station. But this wasn't the nightgown from the crawl space. This was being worn by whoever lay in this grave. The excavation continued with painstaking slowness. More fabric emerged, then what appeared to be bone, a rib cage, delicate and small, a child's remains. Natalie felt her knees buckle. Rachel caught her, held her upright, as the full horror of the discovery became clear. They had found Vivian. After 32 years, they had finally found her. But not alive, not waiting to be rescued. Dead and buried behind the cabin where she'd been held prisoner, her body hidden in the earth while Natalie had spent 3 decades searching, hoping, believing her sister might still be out there somewhere. The medical examiner would need to confirm the identity, but Natalie knew with absolute certainty whose remains lay in that shallow grave. She could feel it in the place where Vivian used to be, the twin connection that had never fully severed despite the years and distance. Her sister was gone, had been gone perhaps since the very beginning, and the men responsible, her father and James Keller, had let Natalie search, had watched her suffer, had allowed her to build a life around a false hope while Vivian's body decomposed in the ground. The motel room felt suffocating. Natalie sat on the edge of the bed, staring at nothing, while Sheriff Grayson spoke in low tones with Rachel near the door. They'd insisted on staying with her, afraid she might be in shock, but Natalie felt nothing. The numbness was complete, a protective shell her mind had erected against unbearable pain. The preliminary examination at the scene had confirmed what everyone already knew. The skeletal remains were those of a child, approximately 10 years old, buried for an extended period consistent with 3 decades. Dental records would provide definitive identification, but the nightgown and the location left no room for doubt. Vivian had died in that cellar, or shortly after being removed from it, and been buried like garbage behind the hunting cabin. Natalie's phone had been ringing constantly, Marcus calling from the Chicago police station where he was being held in protective custody, her colleagues from the university, concerned friends who'd somehow heard the news. She'd ignored all of them, unable to form words, unable to process the sympathy and shock in their voices. Rachel brought her a cup of tea that went cold and untouched on the nightstand. "Natalie, I know this is devastating, but we need you to stay focused. James Keller is still out there, and he's dangerous. The surveillance equipment in the cabin suggests he's been monitoring law enforcement communications, which means he probably knows we found the grave. He might try to run, or he might—" "Come after me," Natalie finished, her voice flat, to silence the only witness. "You weren't a witness," Grayson said gently. "You were a child, and you were sleeping." But Gerald's words echoed in Natalie's mind. The person who knows what happened to Vivian is Natalie. She was there. She knows more than she's telling. What if he'd been right? What if, buried beneath years of trauma and protective amnesia, Natalie did remember something crucial about that night? "I want to try hypnotherapy," she said suddenly. Rachel and Grayson exchanged glances. "Are you sure?" Rachel asked. "Earlier you said you didn't want to risk false memories." "That was before we found my sister's body, before I knew for certain that someone I loved and trusted helped murder her. I need to know if I saw anything that night. I need to know if there's something locked in my memory that could help catch Keller." Sheriff Grayson nodded slowly. "I'll make some calls. There's a forensic psychologist in Indianapolis who works with traumatic memory recovery. She's testified in court before, knows the protocols for ensuring any recovered memories are admissible as evidence." 3 hours later, Dr. Sarah Chen arrived at the motel. She was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a calm demeanor that immediately put Natalie somewhat at ease. They moved to a quieter room the sheriff's department had secured, away from the main investigation. "I want to be clear about what we're doing here," Dr. Chen said as she set up a small recording device. "Hypnotherapy isn't magic. It can't retrieve memories that don't exist, and it won't force you to remember anything you're not ready to process. What it can do is help lower the barriers your conscious mind has erected against painful experiences." "I understand," Natalie said. "I've used similar techniques with my own patients." "Then you know the risks. You might remember things that are deeply disturbing. Are you prepared for that?" Natalie thought about Vivian's remains being carefully excavated from cold earth, about the tally marks carved into stone walls, about 32 years of lies. "I'm prepared." The hypnotherapy session began with standard relaxation techniques. Dr. Chen's voice was soothing, guiding Natalie into a state of focused concentration. Time seemed to blur at the edges, the motel room fading until Natalie felt suspended in a place between sleep and waking. "I want you to go back to November 18th, 1993, Dr. Chen said softly, "the night before Vivian disappeared. You're in your bedroom, getting ready for bed. Can you see the room?" Natalie could see it with crystalline clarity, clearer than any normal memory, the yellow wallpaper with tiny flowers, the twin beds with their matching quilts, Vivian sitting on her bed in her pink nightgown, brushing her hair and humming a song from a cartoon they'd watched that evening. "I see it," Natalie said, her voice sounding strange and distant to her own ears. "Good. Now move forward in time. You're in bed. Vivian is in her bed. What happens next?" "Mom comes in to say goodnight. She kisses us both, tells us she loves us, turns off the light. And then? Vivian and I talk for a while in the dark. We're playing twin telepathy. She's thinking of a number, and I'm trying to guess it. I guess wrong 3 times. She laughs. Then we get quiet. I'm so tired from the field trip. I can feel myself falling asleep." Stay with that moment. You're falling asleep, but you're not quite asleep yet. "What do you hear?" Natalie's breathing quickened. Something was there, at the edge of her awareness, something she'd buried for 3 decades. Footsteps. In the hallway. Quiet footsteps. "Do you recognize them?" "No." "Yes, I don't know. They're familiar, but wrong. Too careful. Too slow." "What happens next?" "The door opens, just a little. I should wake up all the way, should see who it is, but I'm so tired. I keep my eyes closed. I think maybe it's Mom checking on us again." "But it's not your mother." "No." Natalie's voice cracked. "It's not Mom. I can tell by the smell. Cigarettes and something else. Aftershave. Dad's aftershave." In the motel room, Natalie's hands clenched into fists, her body rigid with tension even as her conscious mind remained in that hypnotic state, reliving the night. "Your father is in the room. What does he do?" "He walks to Vivian's bed. He's whispering something. I can't hear the words, but Vivian gets up. She doesn't argue. She just gets up and follows him out of the room. So quiet, like she's done this before." Tears were streaming down Natalie's face now. "I should have opened my eyes. I should have said something, but I just lie there, pretending to be asleep, and I let him take her." "You were a child, Natalie. You didn't know what was happening. But I did know. Some part of me knew something was wrong. That's why I kept my eyes closed, because I was afraid to see." "Stay with the memory. Your father and Vivian leave the room. Then what?" "I hear footsteps on the stairs. Going down. I lie there for a long time, waiting for them to come back. But they don't. The house is quiet. So quiet. And then I hear a car engine outside. A car door closing, the engine getting quieter as it drives away." "Do you get up to look?" "No. I pull the covers over my head and I make myself go back to sleep. Because if I'm asleep, then nothing bad is happening. If I'm asleep, then Vivian is safe in her bed, and Dad is in his room, and everything is normal." Dr. Chen's voice remained steady. "And in the morning?" "Mom wakes me up. She's calling for Vivian, but Vivian isn't there. Mom is starting to panic. She asks me where Vivian is, and I say, I don't know. And I don't, not really, because I told myself it was a dream, that I imagined the footsteps and the door opening and Dad taking Vivian away. I made myself believe it wasn't real. But it was real. It was real. Natalie's voice broke into a sob. It was real, and I knew, and I said nothing. I let them think a stranger broke in. I let them search the fields and the woods and question neighbors. I let everyone believe my father was a grieving parent when he was the one who took her. I knew, and I said nothing, and now she's dead. Dr. Chen gave a signal, and Sheriff Grayson stopped the recording. Slowly, carefully, she brought Natalie back to full consciousness. When Natalie opened her eyes, she found herself curled into a ball on the couch, her face wet with tears, her body shaking. Rachel immediately wrapped a blanket around her shoulders. You're okay. You're safe. It's over. But it wasn't over. Natalie had just remembered the truth she'd spent 32 years suppressing. She had witnessed her father taking Vivian that night. She had heard the car leaving, and she had chosen to pretend it was a dream rather than face the unbearable reality that her own father was a monster. I'm sorry, she gasped between sobs. I'm so sorry, Vivian. I should have saved you. Sheriff Grayson knelt beside the couch. Natalie, listen to me. You were 10 years old. You couldn't have known what your father was planning. You couldn't have stopped him. But I could have told the truth the next morning. I could have said I saw him take her. And then what? He would have denied it, explained it away somehow. And you would have been traumatized even more deeply, forced to accuse your own father of a crime you didn't fully understand. Your mind protected you the only way it could, by hiding the memory until you were strong enough to face it. Dr. Chen added gently, what you've just experienced is called traumatic dissociation. It's a survival mechanism. Your child brain literally couldn't process what was happening, so it filed the memory away where you couldn't access it. There's no shame in that. It's how the human mind protects itself from unbearable truths. But Natalie felt only shame. For 3 decades, she had been the victim, the surviving twin, the woman who had lost her sister to unknown forces. Now she knew she'd been a witness, and her silence, even if unintentional, even if driven by trauma, had allowed the investigation to go down wrong paths, had given her father and Keller years to cover their tracks. Sheriff Grayson's phone rang. He stepped away to answer it, his expression growing increasingly dark as he listened. When he hung up, he turned to the group with grim news. That was Illinois State Police. They found James Keller's car abandoned at a rest stop outside of Champaign. There was blood in the trunk, a lot of it. They're running DNA now, but based on the volume, someone is badly injured or dead. Whose blood? Rachel asked. They don't know yet. But here's the thing. Security cameras at the rest stop show Keller arriving alone but leaving with another person. A woman with blonde hair, mid-20s, wearing a blue jacket. Natalie felt ice flood her veins. Vivian had blonde hair, and she would be 42 now, not mid-20s. Unless, Rachel said slowly, she wasn't the only one. Unless there were others. The implications hung heavy in the air. If Keller and Thomas Brennan had abducted and imprisoned Vivian, what was to stop them from doing it again? How many other children might have disappeared over the years, taken to that cellar or others like it? And if Keller had someone with him now, someone young enough to be another victim, then he wasn't finished. He was still hunting, still claiming prey. They needed to find him before he killed again. The next 12 hours passed in a blur of coordinated law enforcement activity. The FBI had been brought in given the possibility of multiple victims across state lines, and the Millbrook County Sheriff's Department had become the nerve center of a multi-state manhunt. Natalie remained at the station, unable to sleep, surviving on coffee and adrenaline, while teams of agents analyzed the surveillance equipment from the cabin and traced Keller's movements. What they discovered was worse than anyone had imagined. The hard drives from the cabin contained decades of footage, grainy videos from the 90s gradually improving in quality as technology advanced. The FBI's digital forensics team worked through the night cataloging the contents, and by dawn they had identified at least 7 different girls who had been held in that cellar over the years. Vivian was the first, her terrified face appearing in footage dated November 1993. She looked even smaller on camera than Natalie remembered, her eyes wide with confusion as someone, the angle made it impossible to see who, led her down the stone steps into the darkness. But there were others. A girl with dark hair who appeared in videos from 1998, another blonde in 2003, a redhead in 2007. The pattern was clear. Every few years, Keller and Thomas Brennan had taken another child, kept them for varying lengths of time, and then, "We're checking missing persons reports for all the years the footage spans," FBI agent Diana Morrison told Natalie as they reviewed the findings. Morrison was a specialist in crimes against children, her expression professionally neutral, but her eyes betraying deep anger. "We've already matched 3 of the girls to cold cases. Amber Reeves disappeared from Fort Wayne in 1998. Jessica Tambling vanished from her backyard in Bloomington in 2003. Chloe Brenner, no relation to your family, taken from a playground in Gary in 2007. Are they all?" Natalie couldn't finish the question. "We don't know yet. The videos show them alive in the cellar, but we don't have footage of what happened afterward. Ground-penetrating radar is being deployed across the property to search for additional grave sites." Natalie felt physically sick. The cabin property was large, 15 acres of dense woods. If there were more bodies buried there, it could take days or weeks to find them all. Sheriff Grayson appeared in the doorway, his face haggard from lack of sleep. "Natalie, we just got a hit on Keller's credit card. He used it at a gas station outside of Lafayette, Indiana, 45 minutes ago. State police are responding now, but we're setting up a command post closer to the action. I want you to come with us. If we apprehend him, you might be able to help identify the woman he's traveling with." The drive to Lafayette took just over an hour, Natalie riding in an FBI vehicle with Agent Morrison. They barely spoke during the journey, both women lost in their own thoughts. Natalie kept seeing Vivian's face in those videos, kept imagining her sister's final days or weeks in that cold cellar, waiting for rescue that never came. The gas station where Keller had used his credit card was on the outskirts of Lafayette, a run-down convenience store with 2 pumps and bars on the windows. By the time they arrived, local police had already secured the scene and were reviewing security footage. The station manager, a nervous man in his 60s, had been interviewed and was waiting to speak with federal agents. Agent Morrison took the lead, showing him photographs of James Keller and asking if he'd seen anyone matching that description. "Yeah, he was here about an hour ago," the manager confirmed. "Bought gas, some snacks, couple bottles of water. Paid cash, but his card didn't work right at the pump, so he had to come inside. That's when I saw the girl." "Describe her," Morrison said. "Blonde, maybe 23, 24. Thin, real thin, like she hadn't been eating right. She stayed in the car, a dark sedan, looked like a rental. But I could see her through the window. She looked scared, you know. Kept glancing around like she wanted to run." "Did she try to communicate with you?" "She mouthed something. I couldn't tell what, but she looked desperate. I almost called the cops right then, but the guy came back before I could decide what to do. He got in the car and they left, heading west on Route 52. Agent Morrison immediately relayed this information to the tactical teams positioning themselves along that route. Roadblocks were being set up, helicopters deployed, K-9 units mobilized. The net was tightening. Natalie stood outside the gas station, watching the organized chaos of the manhunt, when her phone rang. The number was blocked, but something made her answer. "Hello? Natalie Brennan." The voice was male, calm, familiar from somewhere in her buried childhood memories. James Keller. Natalie's hand shook as she signaled frantically to Agent Morrison. "What do you want?" "I want you to understand something. Your father and I, we weren't monsters. We were providing shelter to girls who needed protection, girls who were lost, abandoned, neglected by their families. You kidnapped them. You imprisoned them. We saved them, Keller insisted, his voice taking on an edge of fanaticism. The world is full of people who would hurt children, abuse them, destroy their innocence. We kept them safe from all that. We gave them a place where they could be pure and protected. Natalie felt rage building in her chest. You kept them in a cellar in the dark. You terrorized them. My sister died because of you. There was a pause. When Keller spoke again, his voice had changed, becoming almost sad. Vivian's death was an accident. She got pneumonia. The cellar was too damp that winter. We tried to help her, but she was so weak. Your father was devastated. He truly loved her, you know. Loved both of you. He was abusing her. He was protecting her from a cruel world, just as I'm protecting Sarah now. Sarah? Is that the woman with you? Sarah is special, like Vivian was, like all of them were, and I won't let you take her from me the way you took the others. They're searching for us, aren't they? Setting roadblocks, sending helicopters. But they won't find us. I've been evading police for 30 years. I know how to disappear. Agent Morrison was frantically signaling to keep him talking, to give the trace team more time. Natalie forced herself to stay calm. Where are the other girls, James? Where are Amber and Jessica and Chloe? They're at peace. All of them. When their time came, we gave them peace. You killed them. We released them from suffering. This world is too dark, too painful for pure souls. We let them go before the world could corrupt them. The religious undertone in his voice sent chills down Natalie's spine. Keller had constructed an elaborate delusion to justify his crimes, convinced himself he was a savior rather than a predator. What about my father? Natalie asked. Did he believe all this too? Thomas understood the mission. He was weak sometimes, felt guilt he shouldn't have felt. But he knew we were doing important work. When he got sick, when the cancer took him, he made me promise to continue, to keep finding the lost ones and giving them sanctuary. He's dead, James. The mission is over. Let Sarah go. Turn yourself in. Keller laughed, a cold sound devoid of real humor. You still don't understand. The mission never ends. There will always be children who need saving, who need protection from people like you. People like me. People who want to expose them to the world's cruelty. People who would rather see them suffer in plain sight than safe in the darkness. You failed Vivian, Natalie. You knew I was taking her that night and you did nothing. You could have saved her, and you chose not to. That makes you complicit in everything that happened after. The accusation hit like a physical blow, echoing Natalie's own guilt. I was 10 years old. Old enough to know, old enough to speak, but you stayed silent, and because of that silence, Vivian spent her final weeks in that cellar, crying for a sister who abandoned her. Agent Morrison was mouthing words, showing Natalie a note. Keep him talking. We've got his location. Where did you bury the others? Natalie asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Their families deserve to know. They deserve to bring their daughters home. They're already home. The earth is mother to us all. They're at peace in the soil, becoming part of something larger than themselves. James, please. I have to go now, Natalie. The helicopters are getting close. But I want you to remember something. You and I, we're not so different. We both failed the girls we were supposed to protect. We both carry that guilt. The only difference is I tried to make amends by saving others. What have you done except run away from your responsibility? The line went dead. Agent Morrison was already on her radio, coordinating with the tactical teams. We've got him. GPS puts him on County Road 850, about 15 miles northwest of here. All units converge on that location. They ran for the vehicles, the convoy racing through rural Indiana with sirens wailing. Natalie's mind reeled from the conversation, from Keller's twisted justification of his crimes, from his assertion that she bore responsibility for Vivian's death. Part of her wanted to reject it entirely, to recognize it as the manipulation of a sociopath. But another part, the part that had suppressed her memories for 32 years, whispered that he was right. She had known something was wrong that night. She had heard her father take Vivian, and she had chosen the comfort of denial over the terror of truth. The convoy reached County Road 850 to find Keller's rental car pulled over on the shoulder, driver's door hanging open, the interior empty. Tactical teams swept the surrounding area, open farmland on one side, a thin strip of woods on the other, while K-9 units tried to pick up a scent. "He can't have gotten far on foot," Sheriff Grayson said, "especially not with someone he's holding against their will." But 20 minutes of searching yielded nothing. Keller and the woman he called Sarah had vanished into the landscape as if they'd never been there. Then, one of the K-9 officers called out from the tree line, "I've got something." They found Sarah propped against a tree, her wrists bound with zip ties, a gag in her mouth. She was conscious but clearly in shock, her eyes unfocused and her skin pale. Paramedics rushed to her side while Agent Morrison carefully removed the gag. "Sarah? Can you hear me? You're safe now. Where did he go?" The young woman's voice was barely a whisper. "The farm. He said he was going to the farm where it all started, where the first one is buried." Natalie felt ice flood her veins. "The Brennan farmhouse. He's going back to where Vivian was taken." They were already running for the vehicles when Sarah called out, her voice stronger now, urgent with terror. "He said he's going to finish what your father started. He said if he can't save any more girls, then he'll make sure no one can find the ones he already saved. He's going to burn it all down." The Brennan farmhouse stood silhouetted against the late afternoon sky, exactly as Natalie had left it 2 days ago, a decaying monument to secrets and suffering. But now, as the convoy of law enforcement vehicles approached down the gravel driveway, Natalie could see smoke beginning to curl from the windows of the second floor. Keller was already inside, already setting the fires that would destroy whatever evidence remained in that cursed building. "Tactical team, deploy," Agent Morrison commanded. "Fire department is en route. ETA 6 minutes. We need to secure the suspect and get out before the structure becomes unstable." Natalie started to exit the vehicle, but Morrison put a hand on her arm. "You stay here. This is an active tactical situation. He's destroying evidence. My sister's room, the crawl space, everything that could tell us what really happened, it's all going to burn. We have photographs, measurements, samples. The important evidence is already secured." But Natalie shook her head. "You don't understand. Vivian's letter, the one she started to write to me, she was going to name her abuser. He is, and then nothing. What if there's something else up there? Another letter, another note that survived. What if she left more clues?" Before Morrison could respond, gunfire erupted from inside the farmhouse. The tactical team took cover behind their vehicles, returning fire in controlled bursts. Through the broken windows, Natalie could see flames spreading rapidly now, consuming the old dry wood with terrifying speed. Sheriff Grayson spoke urgently into his radio. "Suspect is armed and barricaded. We need to contain him until fire department arrives. Do not let him escape the perimeter." More gunshots rang out. Then Keller's voice, amplified somehow, echoing across the property. He must have found a megaphone or speaker system. "You want to know the truth, Natalie? You want to know what really happened to all those girls?" Natalie grabbed a police radio from the nearest officer. "I'm here, James. Talk to me. Your father kept records, detailed records of every girl, every day. He documented everything in a journal he kept hidden in that crawl space. All the names, all the dates, all the things we did to keep them safe. It's up there right now, burning to ash. And with it goes the only chance you'll ever have of finding where we buried the others." Agent Morrison's face had gone pale. "He's bluffing. We searched that crawl space thoroughly." But Natalie remembered the crawl space was larger than just the section under their bedroom. What if it extended further, into the walls, into spaces the investigators hadn't fully explored? "Let me go in," Natalie said. "Let me talk to him face to face. I can buy time for the fire department to arrive." "Absolutely not," Morrison said. "He's armed and unstable. He'll kill you." "He's had multiple chances to kill me and hasn't. He wants something from me. Absolution, understanding, I don't know what. But I can use that. I can keep him talking." Sheriff Grayson looked torn, but finally nodded. "Wire her up, give her a vest, and the moment things go sideways, we pull her out." 5 minutes later, Natalie approached the farmhouse wearing a bulletproof vest and a concealed microphone, her hands raised to show she was unarmed. The smoke was thicker now, pouring from multiple windows. The heat was intense, even from 20 feet away. "James," she called out, "I'm coming in. Don't shoot." "Just you," Keller's voice responded. "Anyone else tries to enter, I'll detonate the accelerants I've placed throughout the house. We'll all burn together." Natalie climbed the sagging porch steps, her heart hammering. The front door stood open, smoke billowing out in choking clouds. She pulled her shirt up over her nose and mouth and stepped inside. The interior was an inferno in slow motion. Flames crawled across the walls, consuming decades of wallpaper and paint. The heat was overwhelming, making it hard to breathe, hard to think. Through the smoke, she could see a figure on the stairs, James Keller, older now than in his personnel photo, his face weathered and hard, a handgun held loosely at his side. "You came," he said, almost surprised. "I thought you'd let it all burn, let the secrets die here." "Where's the journal?" Natalie asked, coughing through the smoke. "Where did my father hide it?" "Behind the false panel in the crawl space. We built a second hiding space, smaller, where we kept our most precious records. Your investigators never found it because they never looked." He gestured toward the stairs. "It's still there. You could save it if you're fast enough. Or you could save me instead. Choose." Natalie stared at him, understanding the test he was proposing. Save the evidence that could bring closure to the families of the missing girls, or save the man who had helped destroy those girls' lives. "Why did you do it?" she asked, stalling. "Why did you help my father hurt all those children?" Keller's expression shifted, becoming almost nostalgic. "I met your father when I was still in patrol. Responded to a call at your farmhouse. Nothing serious, just a broken window. But while I was there, I saw how he looked at you and Vivian. I recognized that look. I'd seen it in my own father's eyes when I was young." Natalie felt her stomach turn. "Your father abused you. He called it love, discipline, protection from a world that would corrupt me. And maybe he was right, because I grew up understanding that some of us are different. We see the purity in children that others miss. We want to preserve it, keep it safe from contamination." "You're describing pedophilia," Natalie said bluntly. "What you and my father felt wasn't love. It was a sickness." Keller's face darkened. "We never touched them, not in that way. We kept them safe, kept them pure. That was the whole point. Then why hide them? Why the crawl space, the cellar, the threats? Because the world wouldn't understand. People would see evil where there was only protection. Your father knew that. He knew if anyone found out about our sanctuary, they would tear it down, expose the girls to the very corruption we were shielding them from." The fire was spreading faster now, flames licking at the staircase, the ceiling beginning to groan and buckle. Natalie knew she had minutes at most before the entire structure collapsed. "What happened to Vivian?" she asked. "Tell me the truth about how she died." Keller's eyes grew distant. "She got sick that first winter. Pneumonia, like I told you. But it was more than that. She stopped eating, stopped talking. She just faded, like she decided to leave us. Your father tried everything, medicine, better blankets, more food. But she didn't want to be saved. She wanted to be with you, and when she realized that would never happen, she gave up." "She died of a broken heart," Natalie whispered, "because you stole her from her family. We gave her sanctuary. You gave her a tomb. You murdered her slowly, day by day, by keeping her from everyone who loved her." Natalie took a step closer, seeing Keller clearly now through the smoke. "And you know it. That's why you've been running all these years. That's why you can't stop taking new girls. You're trying to save one, just one, to prove to yourself that what you did wasn't evil. But they all end the same way, don't they? They all fade away in the darkness. Keller's hand tightened on the gun. You don't understand. I understand perfectly. You and my father were predators who dressed your crimes in the language of salvation. And now you're going to burn with your delusions. Behind Natalie, she could hear the tactical team positioning at the windows, hear Sheriff Grayson's voice in her earpiece telling her to get out, that the house was about to collapse. But she couldn't leave, not yet. Not without the journal that might hold the key to finding the other missing girls. Where exactly is the false panel? She demanded. Tell me, and I'll get the journal out before the fire reaches it. Those families deserve to know what happened to their daughters. Keller laughed, a broken sound. You think you're better than me? You think your silence as a child is different from my actions as an adult? We're both guilty, Natalie. We both let Vivian die. Maybe you're right, Natalie said quietly. Maybe I do share the guilt. But the difference is, I'm trying to make amends. I'm trying to bring those girls home, to give their families peace. What are you doing except running from the consequences of your choices? For a long moment, Keller stared at her, the gun wavering in his hand. Then, with sudden decision, he raised the weapon, not toward Natalie, but toward his own head. The panel is behind the false wall on the west side of the crawl space, he said. 3 feet from the corner, there's a latch hidden in the floorboard seam. Tell the families I'm sorry. Tell them we thought we were saving their daughters. James, don't. The gunshot was deafening in the enclosed space. Keller's body crumpled on the stairs as the tactical team stormed in, pulling Natalie back toward the door. She fought against them, screaming about the journal, about the hidden panel, but they were already dragging her out of the burning building. She hit the cold January air, gasping, her lungs burning from smoke inhalation. Paramedics swarmed around her, putting an oxygen mask over her face, checking her for injuries. Through the chaos, she watched the farmhouse burn, flames now shooting through the roof, the structure groaning its final death throes. The journal, she tried to say through the oxygen mask. The crawl space. Sheriff Grayson knelt beside her. We can't send anyone back in. The building is about to collapse. I'm sorry, Natalie, but whatever was in there is gone now. As if to punctuate his words, a thunderous crash echoed across the property as the second floor gave way, collapsing into the first in an explosion of sparks and flame. The farmhouse where Natalie had lived the first 10 years of her life, where her sister had been taken and her childhood had ended, where decades of secrets had been buried. All of it was being reduced to ash and rubble. Natalie closed her eyes, tears streaming down her smoke-stained face. They had found Vivian's body. They had stopped Keller from taking any more victims. They had saved Sarah from whatever fate Keller had planned for her. But the journal, with its potential answers about the other missing girls, was lost forever in the flames. Unless... Natalie's eyes snapped open. The surveillance equipment, the hard drives from the cabin. If my father documented everything, wouldn't he have recorded it? Wouldn't there be more footage than what you've already reviewed? Agent Morrison was suddenly beside her, her expression sharp with understanding. You're right. We've only gone through about 40% of the files. The rest could contain exactly what we need. As the farmhouse collapsed into a pile of burning rubble, as fire crews arrived too late to save anything but the scorched foundation, Natalie allowed herself a small measure of hope. The building was gone, but the truth might still be recoverable. The girls might still be found. The families might still get their answers. It wasn't justice. Nothing could truly be justice for what had been done to Vivian and the others. But it was something. It was an ending, and perhaps a beginning of healing. 6 months later, Natalie stood in a cemetery on a bright summer morning, surrounded by 7 headstones arranged in a semicircle around a flowering dogwood tree. Each stone bore the name of a girl who had been taken, held, and ultimately laid to rest in unmarked graves around Millbrook County. The FBI's analysis of Thomas Brennan's surveillance footage had provided what the journal could not: detailed documentation of each victim, including locations where their remains had been buried. Over the course of 3 months, forensic teams had carefully excavated 7 grave sites, bringing home daughters who had been missing for decades. Vivian Ann Brennan, 1983-1993. Beloved daughter and sister. Amber Reeves, 1988-1998. Jessica Tambling, 1993-2003. Chloe Brenner, 1997-2007. And 3 others whose names Natalie now knew by heart: Madison Pierce, Emily Hartwell, Sarah Jane Kowalski. All children, all taken too soon, all buried in secret shame by men who convinced themselves they were saviors rather than murderers. The 8th girl, the Sarah that Keller had abducted in his final desperate act, had survived. She was receiving intensive therapy at a facility in Indianapolis, slowly recovering from the trauma of her captivity. Her real name was Bethany Morrison, and she'd been missing from a mall parking lot in Terre Haute for 3 weeks before Keller's death had freed her. She was one of the few who had escaped the fate Keller and Thomas Brennan had planned for her. Natalie placed a bouquet of wildflowers at Vivian's headstone, the same kinds of flowers they used to pick together in the fields around their farmhouse. "I'm sorry I didn't save you," she whispered. "I'm sorry I didn't wake up that night, didn't speak up the next morning. I've spent my whole life running from the guilt, and I finally understand that I'll carry it forever. But I'm not running anymore." Behind her, she heard footsteps. Marcus approached, having given her space for the private moment. He'd stood by her through the investigation, the revelations about her father, the therapy she was now receiving to process the recovered memories and the trauma they contained. "Ready?" he asked gently. Natalie nodded. They had one more stop to make today. The Millbrook Memory Care Facility was a pleasant building with gardens and wide windows letting in natural light. Natalie's mother, Catherine Brennan, sat in the common room working on a jigsaw puzzle. At 68, early-onset Alzheimer's had stolen most of her memories, including the decades of grief and searching that had defined her life after Vivian's disappearance. In some ways, Natalie thought, it was a mercy. Her mother would never have to know the truth about Thomas, about the husband she'd loved and trusted. She would never have to carry the weight of knowing that the man who shared her bed had been a monster who murdered their daughter. "Mom," Natalie said, sitting beside her, "how's the puzzle coming?" Catherine looked up with a vague smile. "Do I know you, dear?" "I'm Natalie, your daughter." "Oh, how nice. I had a daughter once. 2 daughters, I think. Or was it 1? I can't quite remember." Natalie took her mother's hand. "It was 2. Me and Vivian. And we both love you very much." They sat together for an hour, Catherine occasionally recognizing Natalie in brief flashes of clarity before the fog rolled back in. When it was time to leave, Natalie kissed her mother's forehead and whispered goodbye, knowing Catherine wouldn't remember the visit by evening. Outside the facility, Marcus took Natalie's hand. "How are you holding up?" "I don't know," Natalie admitted. "Some days I think I'm healing. Other days I feel like I'm right back in that bedroom, listening to my father take Vivian away and doing nothing to stop him." "You were 10 years old." "I know. Intellectually, I know. Dr. Chen has helped me understand the trauma response, the dissociation, all of it. But the guilt doesn't just disappear because I understand it. Maybe it's not supposed to disappear. Maybe you just learn to carry it differently." They walked to the parking lot, past other families visiting loved ones who had slipped away into the fog of memory. "The book is being published next month," Natalie said. "The editor wants to do a press tour, interviews, the whole thing." She had spent the last 6 months writing a memoir about the investigation, the recovered memories, and the 7 girls who had been found. It was her way of honoring Vivian and the others, of ensuring their stories weren't forgotten. "Are you sure you're ready for that kind of public scrutiny?" Marcus asked. "No, but I'm doing it anyway." Those girls deserve to have their stories told. Their families deserve to have people know what happened, how two men's delusions and sickness destroyed so many lives. As they drove back toward Chicago, Natalie's phone buzzed with a text from Agent Morrison. The message included a link to a news article. Father of missing girl comes forward after reading about Brennan case. Natalie opened the link and read about a man in Ohio who had contacted the FBI after seeing coverage of the Millbrook investigation. His daughter had vanished in 1995 from a rest stop, and he'd always suspected she'd been taken by someone she knew, someone who had gained her trust. He wanted the FBI to review his case, to see if there might be a connection to other predators operating with similar methods. "It's happening," Natalie said quietly. "Other families are coming forward. Other cold cases are being reopened." Marcus glanced at her. "Is that a good thing?" "I don't know. It means more pain, more families learning terrible truths about people they trusted. But it also means justice, accountability, maybe closure. I think it's necessary, even if it's not good." They drove in silence for a while, the Illinois landscape rolling past the windows. Natalie thought about Vivian, about the twin telepathy games they'd played, about the promise she'd made that they would always be together. She'd broken that promise through childhood innocence and trauma-induced blindness. But in the end, she'd brought Vivian home. She'd given her sister a proper burial, a headstone, a place where people could come and remember her. It wasn't redemption. It wasn't forgiveness. But it was something. As they crossed into Chicago's suburbs, Natalie's phone rang. Sheriff Grayson's name appeared on the screen. "Natalie, I wanted to let you know. We've finished processing the last of the evidence from the farmhouse site, the metal box you asked about, the one Vivian hid under her bed. We found it in the rubble, miraculously intact." Natalie's heart skipped. What was in it? "More letters. Letters Vivian wrote to you over the week she was in that cellar. The fire damaged some of them, but most are readable. I'm having them sent to you via courier. They should arrive tomorrow." After the call ended, Natalie sat in stunned silence. More letters from Vivian, words from beyond the grave, from the darkness of that cellar, from the sister she'd lost 32 years ago. She didn't know if she had the strength to read them, to hear Vivian's voice calling out from the past. But she would read them anyway, because Vivian deserved to be heard, deserved to have someone bear witness to her suffering, her courage, her final days. That night, back in their Chicago apartment, Natalie stood at the window looking out over the city lights. Somewhere out there, other families were living with the absence of missing children, searching for answers that might never come. Other predators were hiding behind masks of respectability, choosing their next victims. The world was full of darkness and danger, just as James Keller had said. But it was also full of people who refused to give up, who kept searching, who fought to bring the missing home and the guilty to justice. Natalie placed her hand against the window glass, feeling the cool surface against her palm. "I found you, Vivian," she whispered to the night. "I finally found you, and I promise. I'll make sure the world knows what happened to you. I'll make sure you're never forgotten." In the reflection of the window, she thought she saw a flicker of movement, a shadow that might have been a 10-year-old girl with blonde hair and a bright smile. But when Natalie turned, the apartment was empty except for Marcus sleeping in the bedroom and the quiet hum of the city beyond the walls. She was alone, as she'd been for 32 years. But somehow, the loneliness felt different now. Less like abandonment and more like companionship with a ghost who had waited patiently to be found, to be brought home, to finally rest. Natalie returned to her desk and opened her laptop. Tomorrow, Vivian's final letters would arrive. Tomorrow, she would read her sister's last words and carry them forward into whatever came next. But tonight, she would simply remember. 2 10-year-old girls playing twin telepathy in the darkness, believing they would always be together, believing in a world where promises were kept and monsters didn't hide in plain sight. It had been a beautiful dream while it lasted.